Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Welcome everyone to this new episode of organized by ILS, Islamic Literary Society, called Influential Muslim. Those who are not aware of ILS, we are a small organization to promote Islamic literature, contemporary as well as classic, and encourage people to read, kind of reconnect the Muslim, especially the younger generation, to our literary heritage, and to identify ourselves with our literature and our scholars of the past as well as the present. Today's the person that we're gonna talk about is Abdul-Wahab. So the presenter is gonna be Dr. Muhammad Abdelhamid Mahmoud. Abdelhamid Mahmoud is the assistant professor of cultural study and literary criticism at the Egypt University, South Valley University, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. I know the professor for over a year, alhamdulillah, and it's always been a pleasure speaking with him. We done one more program, another program with him, which you can find in ILS website as well as his YouTube channel. So yeah, I'm glad to have you. So thank you for giving your time, Dr. Mahmoud. And
Actually, it's my pleasure.
it's
Thank you for having me.
you're more than welcome, and it's always my pleasure to talk to you and benefit from your extensive knowledge and understanding. So I'll let you take over, inshallah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أما بعد. Here's like I would like to start by registering my الدعاء بالرحمة للدكتور عبد الوهاب المسيري رحمه الله. He was a so Professor Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri was not only a mentor that I met 3 years before his death. He was more than a father in his humane interactions with me and with other people, of course. So I've been thinking for quite a long time to do something about him, write a research paper, which is basically in progress, or start a conference in his name, and I'm planning all that. But at least when I received the invitation from the Islamic Literary Society, I was very happy to do a very quick. I wanted, and not entirely academic. It's an introductory thing where I don't get into the essential details or the I don't register an academic response to Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri. I was trying to make him simple, or to indicate, or basically to show the main things that he is or should be known for. Okay, so this isn't very much because the life and work of Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri is like it could take like years of study and many students in masters and doing masters and PhD to produce a collected work of research that would answer to or be an appropriate response to the late Professor Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri. But and I'm registering here in it's very hard to give a public lecture about a prolific and encyclopedic writer as Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri. His work is so varied, and his contributions cover fields as different as history, literature, sociology, philosophy, cultural studies, and religious studies. I have chosen particular moments and themes that highlight his work, and given my personal knowledge of him, I added, of course, some spice in terms of some of the, let us say, some of the stories or some of the encounters, small encounters with him. Okay, so Um, this is a brief uh, introduction in terms of, I mean, this is the kind of common knowledge that everybody knows about him. Like he was born in 1938 and he died 2008. Unfortunately, I was teaching in Saudi Arabia at the time, and I was unable to attend his funeral. Um, he graduated with a BA in English literature from Alexandria University in 1959. He received an MA in English and Comparative Literature from Columbia University in 1964 and a PhD in the same field from Rutgers University in 1969. He was a professor emeritus of English and Comparative Literature at Ain Shams University in Egypt since 1988. He was, of course, also a university professor at many Arab universities, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and he was a visiting professor at the International Islamic University in Malaysia. Um, from his teaching career, which spanned over 30 or 40 years, El-Messiri has been known more as a distinguished intellectual, because at a particular moment he decided that teaching and administrative work at university eats up or takes up a lot of time. So he decided, and this is a very courageous thing to do in Egypt, he has given up on his title or on his job as a professor at Ain Shams University. He resigned and he decided to work on his larger intellectual projects. El-Messiri, I mean, and I would like to describe him in this way, was a mujtahid in the social sciences and culture. He was a student of literary criticism and English literature. Actually, his PhD was on romantic literature, Wordsworth and Walt Whitman, and the historical and anti-historical tendencies in literature. Apart from his focus on literature and literary criticism, his work has covered many fields that lie outside his field of expertise. His contributions to those fields, however, were revolutionary. His treatment of secularism as a process, challenged the status quo and the Arab idealistic image of what secularism stands for, because the liberal Arab intellectuals, let us say since Taha Hussein, Salama Musa, and I mean that generation, they were more or less um, um, they signed up to Western ideals of democracy, of freedom, and those ideas were supposed to be um, ideas that never change, ideals that have been literally applied in Western countries. They made no connection whatsoever between the expansion of the West, between the West's expansion, between the West's um, um, imperialism and the Enlightenment ideals. So you would never hear Taha Hussein criticizing France for its Algerian invasion of Algeria and its occupation and colonization, which lasted for 130 years. On the contrary, some intellectuals, including Salama Musa and Hussein Fawzi, they were basically they saw military occupation as maybe a thing that has positive side. So El-Messiri, probably his work and his ideas were a reaction to that atmosphere of let us say, resignation to Western ideals um, and the desire to catch up with the West. The desire to catch up with the West started, let us say, from Muhammad Ali's times, where he wanted to have an army that is as strong as the army of France or the Ottomans or whatever. So from that particular moment, the 1800s, we have been Muslims locked up in a struggle or in a competition, in a, let us say, a race to catch up with the West. And did we catch up? No. So El-Messiri was totally against this notion of progress as catching up with the West. Okay. Um, on the other side, that's why El-Messiri seems to be totally different from the many Taha Hussein's, Hussein Fawzi's, Salama Musa's, for one particular thing he did. He believed in his own culture and in the Arab Islamic culture, and he believed that culture can basically uh, produce interesting, can produce its own ideas of civilization, its own ideas of progress. It can define things differently. So that's one reason why he came under attack, and that's why he is so unpopular in liberal and Marxist circles, because later on he was of course he was a Marxist and a member in a Marxist group, but later on, of course, he realizes, he goes through, let us say, um, a road to Damascus moment, where he realizes that Islam, with its humanism, with its focus on man, is the perfect antidote to the West's movement towards moral liquidity, where morality becomes a very, very relative thing, and where everything becomes basically measured by how much money it gives or how much pleasure it achieves and how much pain it saves a person. Not, and that's what the hedonistic tendencies in Western civilization, which is shown now in gay marriages and lesbian marriages and all kinds of things we as Muslims would not really sign up for. So he is a mujtahid because he challenged the static and idealistic understanding of Western civilization as the epitome of civilization, as the civilization to catch up with. Um, Now, why am I using a very religious term to describe what many see as a secular turned Muslim or Islamist writer? Exactly, the reason is because he did use the word ijtihad. And interestingly enough, I'm a student of Edward Said. I did my master's in him. In Edward Said's book, Orientalism, which was written in 1978, he actually basically asks Muslims to go back to that ijtihad notion, to revive the critical consciousness of Muslims when facing universal problems. Instead of imitating Western countries and Western sociology and Western things, he was basically critical of the Arab liberals like Taha Hussein, who set the aim of culture in Egypt in a book called The Future of Culture in Egypt, uh, where he set catching up with the West as the ultimate goal of education in Egypt. Um, so the thing is, um, uh, at the same time, when Edward Said was raising that call for ijtihad, it was a time also for a Muslim Arab writer and that's Edward Said at Columbia University. That's the most prestigious university in America, and perhaps one of the most top 10 universities in the world. So the call came from two centers, from Cairo and New York. Um, of course, I'm not arguing that El-Messiri is the only person who headed or accepted or propagated that uh, call, or that call for ijtihad. There are many other people who did that, but I'm just not to go beyond my limits and my topic. I'm going to limit that to Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri. Um, so while ijtihad is grounded in the religious sciences, that was done in the 90s. There was a conference at in the 90s which had that title. Okay, it was bias in the social sciences, and that this idea of bias said that all civilizations create concepts and ideas that are basically come in response to the cultural needs of that or this culture, and that all sciences are biased by definition. The sociology is biased towards specific notions in the West. For example, an important category in the West is individualism, while a similarly important concept in the Arab Muslim world and probably in the whole East is family. So family oriented and or individual oriented civilizations, they have those certain biases, um, make the sciences take an unconscious decision to be biased towards family or biased towards individual. So in the West, individual freedoms are the most important um, things there, for which laws are created and um, and they're defended. Um, but on the other hand, family is far more important in our civilization, to the extent that uh, it's a culturally important, culturally definitive thing. So to take the ideas of sociology from Western countries or from Western civilization and apply them to Muslim countries and Arab civilization, you're going to have to accept the biases of the West. You have to turn to destroy this idea of a family as the most important thing in a culture and turn everybody into an individual, like somebody who is whose loyalty to family or even to an extended family is weakened in favor of his individual quests. This is, of course, not to say that individualism doesn't exist, but it's not like it is not, it doesn't take the priority the family takes. So the question is, when we do the social sciences from a Western point of view, because we want to catch up with the West, we commit a very grievous mistake, which is we import the very biases of Western culture. So we enact laws that weaken family ties. We enact laws that allows freedoms that counter our tradition, our religion, and our culture. And they're not productive, because when you accept other people's or other cultures' biases, you basically do not benefit from those theories, because they're the outcome of other realities. Okay, it is very much, and I wouldn't. It would be an exaggeration, of course, but it, the image I'm going to give here is not meant to be an exaggeration. It's meant to, like, it's like importing life on the moon and comparing it to life on Earth. There are different laws of gravity. The law of gravity here is family on Earth, in the Arab world, and the law of gravity in on the moon is the individual is allowed to fly, but each comes with a price. So The ijtihad of al-Misiri, or his call for ijtihad, which is similar to Edward Said's call for ijtihad for Muslims to exercise reasonable argument like their forefathers who created the sciences, the algebras, the algorithms, and all kinds of uh, definitive and important notions that have helped the rise of world science. Um, so ijtihad is very necessary and it's very important in all the sciences. Ijtihad shouldn't be limited to religious fatwas and problems. So here it's really a unique concept. It has, of course, introduced this notion of jihad. I'm sorry, ijtihad into um, uh, into the social sciences. Okay, it basically gives us more confidence to discuss and dismiss Western notions of the family, Western notions of culture, of criticism, of religion. Okay, and it's of course, and it's a reasonable engagement. It's through reasonable engagement that we do that, not through a culture of dismissing others, because you can benefit, of course, from Western knowledge and Western sociology. But we, in doing so, we need to be aware of the biases of Western that we unaware um, import with the knowledges we benefit, we translate or we study um, or we import from Western sciences, which is totally, for example, that may basically make people like the early liberal Arabs like Hussein Fawzi, Taha Hussein, and Salama Musa, and many, of course, others. Their call for the absolute imitation of Western civilization, or the open, or they, let us say, they believed that Egypt, for example, is not of the East, that it was more or less a Mediterranean country, which is it's like Italy. Of course, Taha Hussein was trying to. It was an attempt maybe to take Egypt on a fast shortcut to Europe and Western civilization, and of course, as you can see, it didn't work in that in the way he wanted. We have there are several many generations which went to study in the West, and the outcome or the comparison in terms of achievements in science or in the hard sciences and even in sociology, we still translate sociological books, we still translate literary criticism books, we still um, more or less wait for the latest Le Dernier Cri in France, or in America, the latest book on literary criticism, even the latest book on Islam and Arabic, which is of course, it's a shame. For example, in a country like Egypt, we have Al Azhar, and we have a history of 1,000 years of uninterrupted academic study of Arabic and Islam. So it's to wait for to wait for work done on Islam and translate it from Western countries, Western academia, is just too lazy and dangerous. Um, so I'm moving on. So his ijtihad, of course, came in terms of his study of secularism in the Arab world. Um, he pulled it from the Enlightenment ideals, or and he did that because he was basically because he basically um, wanted to redefine secularism to align it with the changing times. And it was the good thing about both Edward Said and Abdel-Wahab al-Misiri is that they were unafraid of disciplinary authority. We all do research that matches up, or that is very uh, uh, we do research that matches up with what our professors tell us, and or the promotion committees, what promotion committees want us to do. So it's he was courageous enough to go beyond all those limitations of tradition in academia and in among liberal Arabs. Um, Coming back to the word ijtihad, it's a word he used and defended in his book about bias. And for him, ijtihad wasn't like it was a related to building up a paradigm that brings a better understanding of a social phenomenon. While ijtihad is grounded in the religious sciences, as I said, El-Messiri uses it to talk about other fields, specifically sociology and even literary criticism. The conference that was done in the 90s to discuss bias in social sciences was productive, and it encouraged many scholars to use and ground their work in Muslim epistemic categories rather than issue from Western epistemologies, which, as I said, are biased towards a specific worldview. The example of which we gave family-oriented um, Eastern societies and Muslim societies. Even I mean, families are in Japan, in China. It's a of course it's an Eastern thing, and then in the West, this focus individualism and on the individual uh, on individual work, individual on the individual as the sole parameter for the idea of freedom. Um, Let me move on. Of course, the simple secularism that, or what is called partial secularism, was meant the separation of uh, theology and the running of a country, which El-Misiri accepted, and which is basically an Islamic concept. Nobody wants a sheikh or a sheikh al-Azhar to rule Egypt, for example, because it is not his business to run a country. Okay, there's a distinction between civil society where like anybody can run a country. Like I mean, um, given his history and given his achievements in other fields, not and not necessarily the religious field. So this distinction was okay for El-Misiri, but El-Misiri has come up with a different concept, and he said that this simple secularism was in the 18th or the 19th century, and that since then the world has changed and the West has moved on from individual or partial secularism to a comprehensive secularism, which meant the removal of value judgment from human affairs, where everything would be judged without any reference to a transcendental notion of right or wrong, or notions such as justice and morality. It is very much a Nietzschean world beyond good and evil, where the notion of truth is a function of power rather than any logos or any moral being or any set of rules outside it. So economic deals will be done from an economic point of view, not from a human point of view. For example, you could, um, if the price of any product falls down, you could just go and burn it, so its price rises. That's an immoral economic policy. But you could as well decide to send it to Somalia or to places where people are very hungry. Okay, so economic, if you judge, if value is not beyond the economic and it's in the economic, means that if I judge a certain transaction from an economic point of view, I'm looking for interest value, my profit value, but not any human thing or any moral thing outside that. So I can burn anything. I can burn a product if it doesn't really, if its price falls, uh, instead of giving, instead of, for example, giving it to needy people. And that's comprehensive secularism, where fields of the fields such as economics or economy is judged not by any moral standards outside of it, but by um, the standard policy of profit. Now, al-Misiri wasn't always that humanist in the sense that um, he moved um, from a time when he subscribed to Marxist materialism, and he moved from that place, from materialism to spiritualism. And one reason was his quest for the humanistic, the human. One reason why al-Misiri turned to faith after a quarter of a century of resisting faith, as he said in his autobiography. Can everybody see my because my camera is on, right?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, we can
Yes,
But you
see.
on.
can see, right? Yeah. Um. So so one reason why al-Misiri returned to faith after a quarter of a century of resisting faith is the connection he made between man and God. Without the category of God or the transcendental being beyond the world, man disappears. Because that's why, for example, he said, and I'm quoting him, that is why when Nietzsche announced the death of God, I felt, and that's al-Misiri, I felt he was in fact announcing the death of man and the end of metaphysics. For if, as he says, God is dead, then man lives in a natural material world and is himself nothing but a natural material being, a thing among things. So basically, al-Misiri was moving from the economic necessities of Marxism, um, and away also from the imperialistic tendencies of Western countries and liberal elites. He was moving back to faith, um, through he's hanging on to God as a as a thing beyond the natural world, which has nothing to. There's nothing in the world that says man should be king of the world. It is religion which uh, gives us this idea. Otherwise, in such a large universe where every day we have a new galaxy, man seems to be very, very unimportant and very, very insignificant. But his significance comes from his vice regency. He is a Khalifatullah fi ardihi. And that's the Quranic notion, which al-Misiri, of course, talked about a lot, among other things. So man was not insignificant. Man was not part of nature. Man was made up of natural parts like nature, but he was different in the sense that he was given choice and he was given khilafah or vice regency, which meant that he was allowed to act in the world, to stand for good, to stand against war, to stand against all kinds of evil done to humans in the name of technology, in the name of politics, in the name of economics. One thing that I want to, he was a, one thing that I didn't mention is that because of the traditional turf fighting he wanted, because he was into sociology, he wanted to get into it academically by doing. He tried to pursue an MA at the AUC to make up for academic credentials in sociology, but he had to stop as he was met with bureaucratic denials. Um, Even as he said, his work, even though his work was set as a textbook in the departments of sociology in the Arab world, and that shows how much um, traditional notions of of uh, of or denial of cross-disciplinary work causes so much loss of talent, because people here, I mean, if you're in the department of history, you're so limited by your department. In Department of English, you cannot write about um, anything related to geography in any. You can, the movement is usually suspicious, even if you basically succeed. It's usually suspicious. So he tried his best. Though, of course, the best ijtihad that he did was. I still have 5 minutes. Do I have 5 minutes or I have 5 minutes, right? I
Sorry, you have another about say 10, 15 minutes because we started late, you see.
yeah, I see. Yeah. Well, I'm going to finish not as soon as I can, because we want engagements, because I see here some of the people who are. I see Professor Jihan Farouk, and she was a close associate to Professor El-Messiri, and other people. And this is like a very good chance to. I'm not sure if she's still here, but and other people, students of al-Misiri and others. So we were okay. So um, I want to demystifying the West. It needs to be corrected here. I was very, let us say, doing it a bit in a very short notice for at a very short notice. The thing is, the mini generation. I want to put El-Misiri's work in perspective. His work comes on the heels of other work done before him. You can trace El-Misiri to Al-Tahtawi, for example. You can go back as far as 1830, um, like 200 years before he was born, because it was a struggle uh, to. Al-Tahtawi was, for example, um, has of course been trying to demystify France by writing about it, and by writing as a Muslim who is proud of his culture. Okay, and that was a balanced view. But the Al-Tahtawi was basically writing as someone who is supported by a very big army. And I mean, he was sent by Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ali in 1830, for example, was very, very strong. He was as strong as the Ottomans themselves, and his force and power could match any of the European countries he has been sending students to. Of course, later on in the 1840, there was a conspiracy by Western powers to defeat him, and they defeated him and destroyed his fleet. But anyways, when you are cultured, when you are a student of culture, and you are in the West, and you're sent by a very strong country, it has a very, very good effect on your self-esteem. You feel like you're being you are a representative of a winning, not very, very strong, but still a winning country. And this is very clear. I mean, when you compare it to Taha Hussein, for example, he was writing مستقبل الثقافة في مصر, or Hussein Fawzi, تربية سلام, or Salama Musa, تربية Salama Musa. These people were engaging the West and studying in the West, while their countries were more or less under Western occupation, direct or indirect. So they felt somehow that they were the voice of, they tried more or less to, to, to get whatever knowledge in the West and get that back. Their argument was we need to be like the West in order to defeat the West. But of course, they accepted the catch up. We need to catch up the West philosophy or motto, which al-Misiri is very critical of. The many generation that studied in France since Muhammad Ali's first initiative to build a strong army came back with an exaggerated and mystified image of the West. Tahtawi, of course, as I said, is an exception. The last of that generation, Taha Hussein, Salam Musa, and Hussein Fawzi, they were so uncritical of received knowledge from the West that their work was a copycat of Western ideas and theories and prejudices about Islam and the East. And here's my point. There then comes the generation of people like El-Messiri and others who studied in the West, who studied Western literature, and who studied Western habits of mind, Western paradigm. And Misir was trying to understand Western culture through paradigms, through building up a paradigm to see what is essential in a phenomenon and what's non-essential. Um, all that deep study of the West done by al-Misiri has reduced the mammoth-like size of Western countries into real perspective. Okay, they're strong, they are knowledgeable, but that catching up with them as an aim is unrealizable and unwise. So his idea was to produce your own knowledge, producing one's own knowledge. And it's the same argument done by Edward Said, that this idea of feeling inferior to the West doesn't help our quest to become what we want. If we continue to see the West catching up with the West as the sole and the only way to advance. So, and as I said, that has made us basically so weak that we have started to lose our very identity by trying to catch up with the West and imitate it. We started to give up notions of the family. If the West is great because of its individualistic culture, then the family is the problem. Let's just try to disconnect the family a little bit. If religion is this, if the West is secular and it has achieved so much greatness, then let's try to limit and narrow down the space given to religion. So if the West with its economic policies, sometimes they are communist, sometimes they are capitalist, then let's try. And so we've been going from one failure to another, from the Nasserist, communist, and socialist ideas to liberal ideas to, we have been moving on a roller coaster of ideas which all had nothing to do with the culture and the needs of particular societies. So imitating economic policies, academic policies, politics, all kinds of things, even democracy, as defined in the West, doesn't fit our category of what is right and what is wrong. El-Messiri makes that clear because he says democracy is essentially one vote, one man, one vote is very unrealistic. And basically, it means that 51% of the population decide what is wrong and what is right, which means that there's no value system above democracy. if democracy or a majority of people decide that gay marriages are as good as normal marriages, then um, they make morality. They make gay marriages as moral or as okay as any other marriage. So in Islam, that wouldn't work. In our cultures, it doesn't work like that. The masses do not define what is right and what is good just because of a vote. There must be a group of ideals, transcendental ideas, and moral codes beyond uh, the personal preferences of a group of people. Thank you very much for that space, and you're I'm almost done. So to make just let us say to make a recap, El-Messiri has basically was a mujtahid. He challenged so many ideas like catching up with the West, secularism, and he has given generations of students the confidence, like me, I'm an example, to speak their mind and to be unafraid of being judged as not enlightened enough for not subscribing to gay marriages, for example, or to Western ideals of individualism and so on. So, or even being a fanatic, because I don't believe that we should lose our identity in by imitating Western um, ideals. And thank you very much. I'm almost done. I'm done now. So
Oh, Jazakumullah, Dr. Mahmoud, for your presentation. Um, Firstly, I think if anyone has a question, they can either write it down, and I will ask the doctor on behalf of you, or you can speak to the doctor directly. I think the doctor will be he will like it more if you just ask him directly. I have a few questions. I think to begin with. Um, you say that, well, the first question is, I mean, obviously, Dr. Abdel-Wahab, he described himself, or he associated himself with Islamic philosophy and Islamic worldview. Um, did he look at contemporary secularism as a method workable with Islam? Or I know you mentioned that he has his own definition of it. So within his definition, can you somehow work with the contemporary secularism and in the Arab world, or does it have to be a kind of secularism that is born from Islamic identity?
I think he was. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I'll give you example. You said the fact that he didn't want, and you mentioned, you gave example of the Sheikh Azhar not to rule the country. But if we look at prior to Muhammad Ali Pasha coming to power, and when in 1798, I believe, Napoleon went, Azhar was the main central point, and they were ruling the country, and the Mamluk used to be more or less underneath the scholars. So wouldn't and you worked, yeah, I mean, you had his ups and downs, but you worked for centuries, right? Now, wouldn't Abdul Wahab be contradicting himself to say, well, we don't want the scholarly community or scholarly group to rule the country? So there is a secularism that is not secularism in the Western sense of the word, but there is a secularism which is not completely in agreement with Islam. So how does he kind of emerges those two?
Um, basically, um, to use the word secularism to describe what al-Misiri wanted to, it's just can do that between inverted commas, scare quotes, or because Islam, to start with, did not know that separation already, and it did not know that distinction between the religious and the mundane and the secular, the mundane secular world and the religious world, or the religious um, part of life. That's one thing. The second thing, Islam didn't know the theological state, a state or a country run, it did not know a clergy. It did not invest a group of people with a religious power. Okay, so basically, Islam did not know the church, and it did not know, because it did not know the church, there was no laymen and clerical people. There were no laymen, like mundane people, and others who are religious and in whose authority, religious authority, they can just use their authority to steer politics, economics, and of a society. This idea of the secular is basically because in the Middle Ages, starting from the introduction of Christianity into Western countries until the, let us say, the end of religious wars and the introduction of Protestantism, the Pope was the the top figure in everything. In politics, he was connected to God, and in politics, he in the Middle Ages, he could decide who rules who and where and when. Okay, so there was a direct interference from the Pope into the affairs of running countries. Okay, in the whole of Europe, Islam did not know this idea of a religious figure heading, uh, or even a prophet himself was not um, acting as a head of state all the time. He was not, and the problem here is those who describe the prophet as a head of state who was running both, let us say, the secular and the religious. There are two reasons for that. First, there's an anachronism. To use current political terminology to talk about early Islam is a bit anachronistic. Okay? The second thing, the stage of prophethood is a stage which is so specific. You cannot use all its specificities to as a not as a model, but as a an experience in every. There's nobody who can stand in for the prophet. What stands in for the prophet is Sharia. It's the Quran and the Sunnah, not the Khalifa. The Khalifa is a ruler, any person upon whom people agree, not because of his religious status, but because of the agreement of Ahl al-Hal wal-Aqd, people who are in control of the affairs of men or a country. So this idea of a, so to get back to your question, the Prophet and the Misiri uses that a man comes to the Prophet asking him about how to uh, a palm tree, how to make it reproduce, and the Prophet gave him advice, and it didn't work. So the Prophet, and he came the other day, maybe the other week, um, um, and he told the Prophet that it didn't work, your advice didn't work. And the Prophet said, you are more aware or expert in the affairs of your life. So the Prophet was not there to be a great botanist or a great farmer or anything of the sort. That's what we call secularism from an Islamic point of view. That running the affairs of a country has to do more with the normal abilities of administration rather than the religious status of the person ruling. And as such, we nobody wants the head of Al-Azhar to become a president. We have a president who is from a civil society, a president who is not like like a normal person. He's not. He doesn't have any religious status, and uh, Even Sheikh al-Azhar doesn't have a religious status insofar as in terms of being a clerical person. He is there because of his education and because of his knowledge. Okay? So the theological state has never existed in Islam. And whenever it exists, I mean, the only example in modern times, which is not even a great success, is in Iran, where they have like the head of the sheikh or having the upper hand in matters of politics. That's a very specific case, and it's not a mainstream thing in Islam. In all its history, read, for example, I've been interested in reading Ibn Battuta. That's his Rihlat Ibn Battuta, and it's in the 1400s, and it runs over many continents, several continents from Spain to China, and there are rulers of all kinds, of all ideals, and none of them is described as essentially ruling because of his um, religious or theological knowledge or position. So that's
Just
the thing he has been trying to say. Al-Misiri has been trying to say that Islam is okay with the simple um, secularism of not making religious people run a country or do a thing because of their religious knowledge, and that's normal. You do mathematics because you're good at mathematics. So you run a country in terms, you run a certain institution where your mathematics is what counts, not your religious conviction. And so, I mean, look at throughout Muslim history, the Abbasids, the Andalus, the Umayyads, all these people, they usually had Christian, lots of Christians, lots of Jews in positions of power as ministers, as doctors, as army heads, and they were not, they were in very important places, not because of their religion, essentially. They were not great Muslims, but because of their expertise in what is required.
sure. Well, thank you for that. Please, everyone, ask questions. To engage. While I wait for some question to come up, just to follow up, Dr. Mahmoud. Now, I understand what you're saying, and I can kind of appreciate what Abdul-Wahab is trying to do. But since he's making this differentiation between the West and the East, and there's a central argument that we are who we are, they are who they are, and cross culture in that sense will not work. So why then use the same terminology of secularism? I mean, you just confuses the general public. Why use it? That's the first question. I mean, isn't it not kind of doing by using that term is kind of not making it clear? It's not demystifying the West. It's actually kind of agreeing with it. I mean, in other words, what when you read his work, and I had the pleasure of reading some of his work, and when he says the word secularism, in one hand he's saying we don't want nothing to do with the West as far as our cultural identity is concerned, but yet I use some of the terminology, but that terminologies are brought out from a cultural understanding. So the separation between the church and the state is then termed as what secularism essentially is. So by him borrowing that term, is he not then giving a mixed message to the younger Muslims, saying that look, we
Yeah,
can develop.
well, what I asked, my answer to that question is, El-Messiri was a professor of literary criticism, and essentially he went into philosophy and sociology. So he was engaging Western concepts and trying to deconstruct those concepts, okay, and trying to understand them from a Muslim point of view, distinguishing between the harmless secularism of not of not allowing people in people who are um, of not allowing that distinction between I mean of not limiting the limiting people to who get into running a state, but by not making them or let us say by not imagining that distinction between religious and uh, secular. Um, that's one thing. So the thing is to get he was not confusing anybody because um, that's the sort of academic study that everybody goes through. Okay, and it's not in the general. I mean, his work was not in the domain of general interest. He will be well known among um, like the normal among academics. Of course, he had meetings, episodes on TV and in lots of conferences he attended, where he becomes a little bit, let us say, vocal, a little bit simplistic, simplifying those concepts in and couching them in more religious terms, okay, and in hadith literature. Um, but and of course you have to realize that El-Messiri started as a communist, and it took him a quarter of a century to move from the economic theories and necessities of Marxism and um, class struggle and survival of the fittest, all those theories, into Islam. So you should allow his work to his work reflects that movement from materialism to spiritualism. Okay.
Sure. Just there's another question. Is there a sort of development in his thought that makes his later work to extend a different? So I think what the question is, if I understood it right, that what makes his work any different than any other thinker? Why should he stand out? Um, you know, what can he? I think, and due to time, I suppose we have to wrap up soon. Um, why should he
Of,
get the spotlight, and
yeah,
why should we kind of concentrate on him?
his later, I mean, of course, Mr. Wael, Dr. Wael, you have it's a very important question. It's not easy to answer because, of course, his movement from Marxist ideals to Islam or to faith is the most important movement is done because it's a movement from the economic necessities of communism and Marxism um, to the notion of humanism or what we call Islamic humanism. And the best way to for you to realize or to get to an answer to that, he makes an answer, but extensively in his autobiography. So I would advise that if you want to pursue that topic further, you need to read his autobiography because it's there that he tells you exactly where he moved from, the reasons why he moved from A to B to C, and when. So that sequence and development, or the sort of development, his or turns his thought has taken, is is very clear in his autobiography. And the major uh, thing here, his movement from materialist theories to um, Islamic humanism, or to believe that Islam offers a great alternative to the theories of materialism, which reduces man to nature matter and thinks of him in terms of the physical laws, not in any, not as the vice regent of God or in anything, as somehow who is somehow removed um, uh, from those laws. So he moves to Islamic humanism. So, but yes, reading his autobiography will enlighten you, will give you a good perspective in his own words for an answer to your question.
Um, is his autobiography available in English?
Um, Actually, it's available, but it's unpublished, and they've been really trying um, to to see why that is the case, and we're still trying to get uh, to get to a decision on that and try to get it published.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. Any more question, anyone? I mean, I have tons of questions, but I think due to time, unfortunately, we have to end there. But I'm a big fan of the doctor. But having
Thank you
said
very
that,
much.
after reading some of the works, there is a question. Go ahead. Yeah, if you can hear me,
Yes. Hello,
please
my
go
name
ahead.
is Mahmoud Hafiz. And hi, Dr. Mahmoud. I
Hi, this
happen
is
to
my
be,
friend. Mahmoud is my friend.
yes.
Yeah.
Hello,
Thank you,
hello,
Mahmoud, for
Dr. Mahmoud. How are you doing?
thank you for showing up here. We need to get to
Well,
face to
well,
face.
yeah, we're going to
We're
do that very
neighbors.
soon,
We're
inshallah.
neighbors, so we're like he's on
Yes,
the other street. So okay, go ahead,
yes,
yeah, Dr.
yes.
Mahmoud.
Yeah, thank you so much. I don't want to waste the time, and I'll jump to my observations very quickly. Here, actually, I noticed I'm not talking specifically about Dr. El-Messiri or Edward Said, but it's a general comment on the presentation in general. There are a few points that caught my attention. First of which is this observation that all sciences are biased sciences, that sociology is a biased science. And if we borrow from the West, that means that we have to take all the biases of the West. Um, so, um, this idea, if we may ask, that maybe at a certain point in history, when the West came to borrow from the Eastern countries or the Eastern civilizations, I don't want to call it Islamic civilization, or even if we say if we call it Islamic civilization. So where the borrowing of the West uh, also bounded by this observation? I mean, did they have to take with their borrowings from us all the biases of the East? That's my first question. The second point is there is a general tendency of condemning the Western secularism, okay, and which is basically secularism is the separation between religion and the matters of the state. And then we moved on to say that the Western secularism led to what we can see now as a gay marriage and that sort of homosexuality and that sort of thing, right? Uh, but on the other hand, we were boasting of the Islamic civilization as a secular civilization in the sense that the religious people or the sheikhs or the people of religion did not interfere with the matters of the state. So, yeah, I want some further clarifications on this, which seems to me a little bit contradicting. And the last thing, um, I'm borrowing, I'm quoting Edward Said here in his book Orientalism when he said that Orientalism has helped to define the West or to define Europe as the East's contrasting image and personality. Like when the West came to define themselves, they said we're the opposite of this, we're the opposite of the East. They didn't find a natural definition for themselves, so they had to define themselves by contrasting themselves to the East. Okay, in this in this situation, in the current situation, when we deal with the West and so on, isn't the call of Dr. Misiri to abandon the Western civilization and so on and their sciences and that sort of thing? Isn't this repeating the Western mistake of defining ourselves as the Western contrasting image and personality, etc.? So this is in short my comments, and I'm looking for some clarifications from Dr. Mahmoud.
Uh,
Thank you so
thank you
much.
for thank you, my friend and colleague, Dr. Mahmoud. Well, I think when I said bias, um, I wasn't, and I gave examples. I wasn't saying um, importing sociological terminology and sociology and theories in sociology because it's a humanistic field. It is sometimes biased, and of course I'm here giving examples from al-Misiri. Not it's not my view essentially, but I subscribe to it. So the question wasn't to abandon sociology; it's to understand its biases. Okay, and I gave an example that there's the bias here is not a negative word because Islamic civilization has its own biases. Okay, Western civilization has its own biases. Okay, it's understanding one's own biases and other people's biases that we need to do. So, and I give the example of family versus individualistic culture that Islam seems to be biased for um, the, the 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 idea of family, as is many Eastern cultures like China, for example. So Islam here is not the only culture or religion that stands for family, and Western civilization has a tendency or bias towards individualism. So there's no condemning here. It's just a chance, as al-Misiri usually did, was to build a paradigm to try to understand the biases of a culture, because understanding is a strong way of responding to the challenging challenges of other cultures. Okay. Um, the second thing you're saying, nobody's abandoning or condemning secularism. Actually, Said divided I'm sorry, al-Misiri divided secularism into two kinds. The simple one, church and state, and I explained that was okay for Muslims because no one wants the Sheikh of Al-Azhar in the place of the president. And Islam doesn't make it necessary even. I mean, if you look into the books of jurisprudence on who should rule. But I mean, the oldest book or one of the books that I've read goes back to the fifth Hijri century. It is called it is called غياث الأمم في التياث الظلم by Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni. And in that book, he talks about the characteristics of the ruler. And he doesn't really say that be religious or having a degree on law or being a faqih. He talks about his ability to run the affairs of the state. And he can, of course, employ other people to help him. Okay? So basically, there's no theory where the imam or the leader of the Muslims should be like a very religious or theologically. He doesn't rule in the name, because the difference between rulers in the Muslim world was that they were not ruling in the name of God, like in Western countries. The ruler or the king was God's um, God's shadow. So if you challenge him, you challenge God. But in Islam, such a distinction did not exist. There was no clergy. So the secularism, which separates church from state, is more or less compatible with Islam. But the comprehensive secularism, where um, every field in life is judged by its own criteria, is self-referential. As I said, the economy is judged by interest and profit, not by any values of justice or truth or anything beyond it. Politics um, and other fields are self-referential, so they do not respect any rules or any values outside what politics dictates or what economic theories dictate. Okay, and I gave the example of the United States burning down a specific crop because its prices fell. That's immoral. That's okay from an economic point of view, but comprehensive secularism uh, would approve of it because economy is economy. But and that's why comprehensive secularism doesn't allow any moral system to interfere in the running or in judging economic, political, and other fields. And this was the sort of secularism that he denied. Edward Said, of course, said the West was defining itself in contradistinction to the Arab Muslim world. And if we're rejecting the West or trying to oppose it or abandoning some of its ideas, we're going to be doing the same. I don't think so, because we're just being selective, being more like, as I said, the notion of ijtihad, that you do not receive theories of criticism, theories of sociology as given, as God-given ideas. And that, as a Dr. Mahmoud Hafiz, you can take up any set of ideas from Western culture and doesn't and criticize and disagree and agree with some of that and some of this. It's um, not as a final truth or as the only academic thing to go with. So the critique of social theories coming from the West or anywhere is very essential.
Well,
But it doesn't mean that you abandon like the whole knowledge coming from the West. And nobody even came near talking about the physical sciences. We're so far limited to the human sciences because human sciences are more than anything else are very much connected to the environment in which they have risen, um, unlike physical sciences, which are general laws that apply everywhere. So it's easy to take from medicine, from physics. There's no problem with science, the hard science as such. We're talking about the human sciences where people come up with philosophies or ideas or theories that are the outcome of a particular place and a particular culture. Taking that and trying to apply the theories to a society that is culturally different is wrong. Like, for example, um, trying to catch up with the West on gay rights, for example, or to catch up with the West on specific things that are irrelevant, not just are irrelevant, are against your beliefs or the beliefs of the general public or general of culture. And again, that that is not a priority. I mean, those defending, I mean, we should be defending like poor people, the poor people's right to eat and not sleep on empty stomachs, like the Prophet said.
on the, sorry,
Um,
doctor, to
so
cut you, Dr. Mahmoud. Just due to time, we just got a few more
thank
minutes.
you very much. Yeah. So
I like to take this opportunity to thank everyone, especially Dr. Mahmoud and
thank you very
all
much.
other for joining us. It's always a interesting subject. I know we have different views and different, and I think this is a healthy discussion to kind of to get different side on a particular issue. So Jazakumullah for all your contribution, everyone. We will be running, ILS will be running a number of program on life and works of individual. I mean, that was today was Dr. Abdel-Wahab. We got one coming on Allama Iqbal, on Ismail Raji Al-Faruqi, one on Dr. Isa Ahmed. So I invite everyone to kind of keep in touch with ILS, and inshallah when those are running, perhaps you can get the when you register you can get the Zoom. And also I invite everyone to visit the website, which is www.islamicliterarysociety.com, and contribute, either by giving their book reviews or comments or whatever ways. It's a platform to engage, it's a platform to reconnect ourselves with our Islamic tradition and Islamic literary heritage. So I invite everyone, inshallah, to engage with ILS and join us in our future program. And we also have monthly reading club with Iqbal Center in Leeds University, University of Leeds. So I also invite everyone to, inshallah, to register if possible, and be part of that discussion. So once again, Jazakumullah khair for your time and your effort and taking part in this. And inshallah, hope to see you guys very soon and in another fruitful discussion. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Alaikum salam.